Good morning and welcome to another episode of A Cup of Coffee with Bill. And I'm excited today to talk about safe sports venues in the COVID world right now. I know we've seen some successes, some misses around the sports industry. So I've asked Jon Niemuth, who is the Director of Sports Americas at Aecom, to join me today to talk about what he's seen from some of the leagues that have completed their seasons and walk us through, if we're looking at 2021 and trying to get our season off the ground, if you're a team or a league, what should we be doing now that we've got some data and some best practices on the books? Jon, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'm glad to be here. And since I drink coffee 24 hours a day, spending some time with you drinking coffee and talking is just part of my daily routine. So it's just, peas in a pod.
Beautiful. Yeah, that is one of the things I miss is the coffee meetings. It was always a great excuse to have somebody else pay for my coffee and talk shop. So it's been a nice replacement for these.
No problem. No problem. I'm glad to be here.
So, Jon, for my viewers and listeners who don't know you and haven't had the pleasure of meeting you in person, could you just give us the quick 30-second elevator pitch on who you are and what you do with Aecom?
Sure. So, Jon Niemuth, based in Kansas City, architect by training, went to school up in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, undergraduate degrees in architecture, city planning, sort of big scale things. Have been a sports architect for 25 years. I started that professional path with my current firm in 1995, kind of been there ever since. In my current role, it's really kind of like maybe I call it a little bit of like an extension cord. We do so much within the sports space. We literally do everything from master planning, city planning, economic studies, cost estimating, all the way through to construction. My job is really to synthesize all of those things, prior to construction, bring those services to clients, cities, whatever it might be, and kind of help them down their path and their journey, which, in the sports facility space could be, a decade or more. I've got several projects in my past that went more than 10 years. I've got a couple now that are on that path. So it's really about kind of helping clients with the tools to create their vision. And we do it all in a one-stop shop. Since March though, I've really been pivoting a little bit because again, the Aecom does so many different things that it's really been applying our certified industrial hygienist practice. We have several hundred folks that are functional in that space, which is a really great asset to have with the current COVID situation. And then a lot of our mechanical building mechanical experts and our biohazard experts, and really marshaling those resources to bring specific expertise to the sport and entertainment space. And the reason that's important is, again, I'm an architect. I've learned a lot about this, been a very quick study since March, but the folks that we have are the folks that have been advising the federal government and all the various agencies on everything from anthrax to SARS-CoV-1, bird flu. I mean, you name it, we've been kind of the go-to resource for the U.S. federal government and several other, foreign governments around some of these infectious threats or managing, different similar kind of global or health crises via, whether it might be bird flu, swine flu, whatever the case may be. So it is a bit of a niche expertise that was not very sexy until March, and now it's very sexy. And these folks are really, really smart, and it's been a great asset to have. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit, today, Bill, with the comments we're getting from the CDC and the WHO and folks like that. It's really important to have somebody who can synthesize that very technical briefing and guidance into something that makes sense for a game ops, an event ops, a sports league, a building operator, folks who don't live in that space every day. How do we translate that down to words and phrases and protocols that they can relate to and understand and activate? Right. So that's been a lot of what I've been doing, since March, in addition to my day job.
Right. So it sounds like, I knew a good portion of how big and different disciplines that Aecom had under its roof, but it sounds like this wasn't a huge pivot for you guys, from what you were just saying. Maybe more for you and learning a little bit more about it, but.
Yeah, we were, again, we're a global company. this situation had hit our Asia operations in the fall of 19. So we, as a company, we were already in it, and we're developing resiliency plans for when it got to the United States and Europe. But part of that as well is we were also sort of early engagement with the Army Corps of Engineer in different cities as they started to stand up their alternative care facilities. So we were already bringing that expertise to the healthcare sector or the government response sector, to make sure that the right kind of facilities, the things we've kind of seen in convention centers and big open spaces, we were developing those plans to put those facilities in place, in some cases in a matter of days or weeks.
Wow.
In some cases in parks and outdoor environments
Right.
that weren't supposed to be hospitals. But so we had a lot of that expertise mobilized already. We were already on the front line, as it were, of the knowledge and the information that was coming back, daily, and sometimes multiple times per day. And so, yeah, it wasn't for those folks, for our industrial hygienists and our bio containment experts, it wasn't a big pivot. For me, kind of getting to know those people, and then, like I say, how do we bring that information to the sport and entertainment space in a way that would be helpful. It too was probably about a matter of a week and a half, and we were up and running and already doing work on some of the protocols that I think we as sports fans kind of saw play out over the late summer and fall.
Right. It's impressive for that size of an operation, and it's more timely now, especially because we do have some information and best practices and things to not do as a league or teams to try to get fans back into the venues. I know Dr. Fauci was just interviewed, doing the rounds with some different sports networks this past week, saying he's not really expecting and wouldn't anticipate any fans or anywhere near full arenas for the NBA season coming up. But he did offer some hope that if we can buckle down, and that's a big if, and if the vaccine is able to get wide distribution, which it looks like the trajectory of those plans are going to get to that point, we could be seeing full stadiums for the NFL in fall of 21. So there are some glimmers of hope. And then going back to the NBA, the Utah Jazz are going to be the only ones that have announced and have gotten approval locally to have fans. I think I saw a report that said they'll be allowed to have 1,500 people in the arena. 5 other teams have already proactively said they aren't letting people in, and Golden State had their plan rejected locally by the government there. But given their situation, that's not surprising. So, we look at that, but we also look at what has taken place in the industry so far. And I think there have been some great successes. I know the NBA bubble was a huge success. That didn't have fans, but they were able to get some spectators in by way of the players' families in later in the season. And then NASCAR, I think, was a resounding success when they were able to get the season back up, but how they structured getting fans into the tracks, policies, selling the tickets, how they spaced the pods of people out. So I'd just be curious. I know you haven't done work with them directly, but knowing what we know and what you've seen, and I think you mentioned that you are a NASCAR fan, what's your opinion about how they did, and what can we, oh yeah, they're right
See
there.
The giant tire, the Michael Waltrip tire behind me?
Yeah. So I mean, what can we take away and apply for 2021 if we're trying to get a season off the ground?
It's interesting. And we were talking a little bit before we started to record. I had gone back and listened to some old Dale Jr. podcasts and some conversations from this summer where they were talking about, in some ways, and again, this is a NASCAR podcast talking to a NASCAR audience, so nobody at me for what I'm going to say, but they were the first major professional sport to, quote, come back. And they came back for a long time without fans. But in a lot of ways, if they had started and failed, meaning had outbreaks within the garage area, had issues within the teams, a lot of the other sports leagues might not have had the confidence to do what they were able to do, vis-a-vis what the NBA and WNBA did. I think we saw the early the early returns with baseball where, it was touch and go at the beginning. But I think the thing that NASCAR did, and I think that's the thing we're seeing with a lot of sports, is they set the fan part about the fan part apart for a second, because one of the things we've said from day one, and I think it's latent in some of the different comments you hear from the different health professionals, is it's really about behavior. The disinfection and all the vaccine discussions, all that stuff is great, but the root of all the issues we're having is behavior. And we had said that right away when we were counseling professional sports teams and collegiate teams. Is it's not about, like, everybody wants to talk about, oh, we got to take seats out of our stadium, we got to tarp off stuff. It's like, look, if you don't get your training room and your weight room and your practice facility under control, the venue is going to be the least of your worries, because you're not going to have a team to play. And so I
Exactly.
think that's where NASCAR was really good right away. They understood, kind of the localizing of the resources. The folks that went to the track were not the folks that worked in the shop. They introduced those bubbles within their own teams. Like, if you were the pit crew, you always, like, pit crews live in the race shop. They
Mhm.
didn't go in. Once they got to that point, they sort of separated the people who were traveling from the people who were working and setting up the cars. Clearly there's a bridge there with the guys who load them and haul them, but they did a really good job of recognizing right away that you needed to have almost bubbles within bubbles to protect the ability for the sport to happen. And then I think once they got to the latter end of their season, there was good evidence with what we were doing in college football. There was some good evidence in what you were seeing internationally to say, hey, if we're going to bring fans into venues, there was even, there was a couple of MMA fights. There was a
Mhm.
couple of professional bull rider PBR fight or events. So there were some things that had happened this summer, that gave people the playbook, if you will, for how do we do spectators. There was a couple of live entertainment, like concerts, comedy shows. Chappelle did the thing in Iowa. Like, there were all these good examples that now towards the end of the year, they're like, yeah, we can do pods, we can do capacities. Like, I think it was pretty easy for them. And again, you look at, roughly we've been seeing, I think it's been sort of individual research, but then it's been tested by, us and a number of folks, 20, when you start looking at sort of the safe 6 foot barrier, um, whether you're family pods or related pods or whatever the terms are that different folks are using, you still get somewhere in that 20 to 25% range based on straight capacity. So if you're
Right.
Talladega and you're 150,000 people, I can't do that math in my head, but you're going to be like 23% is the max you would be able to do at that track. And then you start to say, well, if NASCAR is going to have 30,000 people at Talladega, which normally will see well over 100,000, it's pretty easy for them to distance it out.
Right.
Uh, so I think that's where that sport again kind of has it all over a couple others. You've seen some NFL teams have been pretty successful in that low, hey, we'll have 5-10,000 people in an NFL stadium that is designed to hold 65 or 70,000, and that can be done pretty safely. The crux of the issue though gets back to the behavior.
Right.
When people are there, they got to keep their mask on. They got to keep it on all the time. When they go to the bathroom, they got, like, it's all these things along the way. And if you don't do those things, then it's a domino. The whole thing goes down. So I think that's where it kind of still gets back to, is that we as sports fans, yeah, I appreciate, again, I appreciate the folks who's are much smarter than me in this area that have MD after their names. But in the end, it comes back to us.
Right.
All the guidance, 10-day quarantine versus all that's great, but we as fans have to commit to a rigor in our behavior if we want to have full stadiums, full racetracks, full golf courses, full ballparks, whatever the case may be. It's really up to us.
Yeah,
So
the human behavior side of that is interesting, and I look at the NFL. Again, they've been fairly successful. I want to say that the only reported issues that we've really heard about, ignoring the on-field problems with coaches and players,
which
not
are
work.
all behavior driven. Like even this issue
Exactly.
with the Broncos, 100% personal behavior.
Hmm.
If guys just not wearing masks when they're in meetings, boom, shut down. So that's what's kind of, I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but it's like a lot of the things you're seeing at the team level are not just this rampant spread of a disease. It's about choices individuals are making. And then we have to institute the protocols, the safety protocols, the contact tracing. Like that's where the issue is coming from, is if they had just done that simple thing of
Right.
following a mask, following behavior restrictions, wouldn't be having discussions about not having quarterbacks. You just wouldn't. So
Right. Yeah. And I always look, it goes back to that argument whenever a pro athlete gets in trouble and they say, well, that's not really his choice to be an example for people. He's just popular because he is playing at this high level. But then we go back to the very beginning where you are negotiating with the unions in the league to try to salvage a season in any of the pro sports. And these guys are all pushing heavily to get back on the field. But we get back to this issue of, it's a very simple thing. Why can't we just wear a mask and we won't have a problem? So not to drag us into a philosophical or psychological full human behavior discussion, but it is interesting because I don't think that is the emphasis of a lot of conversation and thought around this problem. So how is Aecom educating leagues and teams on that aspect of human behavior, or are you bringing in outside experts? I'd be curious to hear what you guys are doing in that space, because
it's an evolving situation. And one of the sort of we've had with some of the clients we're working with, we do have some kind of humorous exchanges, because there are some optics. There are just some things from a personal optic or a societal optic that are they're just hard to do. Like we very early on, I got to get my dates right, like April, May, we had talked about a re-occupancy plan for a stadium. And we're like, hey, the best case maximum attendance get above 23% is you got to have face shields. And they're just like, no. I'm like, okay, well then masks. Like, no one's going to wear a mask. Like, so you go back to spring and we were saying, like, look, this is it. This is the what the science and the research, even if it's fast research, is telling us is these two things. And you're not going to go full, but you're going to get a number that starts to make the pro forma irreasonable.
right.
It's like, no. Well, and then when we got to late summer, it's like, yeah, 100%, everybody's masked up all the time. So like
Right.
But then we've also seen just recently this notion that certain face shields aren't providing the protection that we thought they would be providing back in March and April. So you have to be like, one of the things we tell folks right away is it's a very dynamic situation. Some of the research is changing, where we were back in the spring or the early days, if I'll say, there were certain chemicals, there were no chemicals that were certified by the EPA to be used as a disinfectant. Well, now there are a couple, and there were technologies that were being promoted that we said, look, don't buy those. They don't work. Most hand sanitizers, not effective unless you like, so there were things like that we were trying to overcome that I think the folks were hearing us, but it was hard to communicate that to their fan base or to their departments or to their legislatures, whoever the jurisdictional bodies were that, were signing off, because it goes from optics to science to behavior and back to optics, back to science, and that dialogue is just hard. It's hard for people to get their mind around. I mean, we talk all the time about, hand sanitizer. Like even in our office, we got hand sanitizer stations everywhere. And I'm like, if that's the kind of stuff that was in my kitchen 12 months ago, you might as well put water in it in terms of how effective it's going to be. Because the mix of that hand sanitizer and the amount of time it needs to stay wet on your hand is in the 2 to 3 minute range. And if you think about the last time you had hand sanitizer, how long was your hand wet for? 30 seconds? 10 seconds, maybe?
Exactly.
So for that thing to do its job, you need to be doing, like, never mind the funny hand washing songs that we've all learned. Right. 3 times as long with hand sanitizer, and now it's doing. So that's the behavior part that we were trying to talk to folks about. But when you get to high performance athletes, the good news for us is one of our lead industrial hygienist is a power lifter. Again, talk about sort of random things that you figured out. So she understands being in a weight room. She understands how you need to breathe in certain times of athletic performance, athletic training. And even that, how do we need to manage our breath? What kind of a face covering can we provide when it's not just normal breathing and talking, but it's breath under stress. I'm wheezing because I've just done reps or I've been running or whatever it is. So we have been having those discussions, and you know, disinfection's a really interesting concept when you're talking about public transportation or airplanes or a conference room, but now do it in a weight room where you've got, you know, 80 pro football players, you know, doing reps, and every piece of equipment needs to be cleaned. Or, you know, at the NBA, one of the things we were doing is, you know, we have multiple practice gyms. Every one of those gyms needs to be disinfected, and then the room needs to settle, and that may take 3 hours.
Right.
And it's just like that kind of, and then that's where the behavior comes in too. How do you schedule your day? How do you move from place to place? How do you get yourself in a different rhythm that is more deliberate and less sort of in the moment? Like, you have to be able to say, hey, we may go from lifting to practice in the same space because that space is safe, it's clean, whatever term you want to use, but then we got to get out of here, and there may be a break of, you know, hours before we can get to the next thing, versus just going from a practice gym to a weight room to a training table to a sauna or a hot tub to our locker room. Like, the flow that we've embedded in high performance athletic training, game day routines, like everything needed to be reviewed and in some cases adjusted. Or we said, hey, put yourself in a bubble. Once you get inside that, and once that community is together, in theory, the risk can go down. You know, as long as you're not penetrating that bubble, you don't have folks from the outside coming in or the people from the inside going out and coming back. You can get yourself to some kind of a normal schedule, but it requires some of that rigor. And you know, even if you're talking about college kids, yeah, like basketball, football, gymnastics, whatever the sport may be, it's not just, you know, Power Five football. You just got to get yourself into a bubble and then not make bad choices, not go to the bar on Friday night, not go to a house party. Like, I think that's again where we've seen in amateur athletics, that's where we've seen all the issues predominantly. And again, it's the choices that are being made socially that are impacting what's happening in their competitive environments, not things that are in a weight room or a training room or a meeting room. There still is some of that, but the things that really driving the challenges are personal choice, personal behavior. So that's where we've been really, again, trying to advise in that. But it's easier, like you said, it's easier when you're a professional athlete and it's a, you know, players association, and there's compensation and there's rules and there's contracts, versus when you're talking to collegiate athletes, you know, who are kids and
Right.
they want
And
fun. So it's all over the map, you know. It really, it's but you know, that's a long answer for saying it depends. You know, some situations are easier and more clearly defined and communicated than others. But we also, you know, to your point about, and I always laugh because every time I've heard that, I always think of the Charles Barkley, I'm not a role model. But, you know, that's where we said, train your coaches, have your executives, like, lead from the front with the people that are admired or seen as leaders in your organization, and make them be the example that everyone else will follow. Because if you have a very strong coach and that coach is doing it, you know, the culture of team sports is that, you know, hey, if coach says it, I'll do it. I'm here for my brothers, I'm here for my sisters. You got to create that culture. And I think that's also, like, that's where we've seen a lot of struggles, is the coaches aren't even doing it. So it's, I think it's, you know, if you wanted to do a great, like a great sort of social studies research paper a couple of years from now, you know, the impact of leadership and on behavior, like, there's lots of great leadership and behavior, like Bear Bryant or, you know, Vince Lombardi, whatever. Go back and do one in this pandemic environment and see how the presence or absence of certain habits or behaviors have impacted the ability for teams to perform at the highest level.
yeah, there's going to be a lot of fascinating research and books and just in general knowledge that we're all going to be able to take away, you know, by 2025, because I think once the dust is settled, you know, that analysis is going to take place. And I didn't intend for us to go that far into that discussion about personal responsibility, but I think that's the hidden side of what you guys are doing at Aecom, and then what we see going well or going horribly wrong in professional sports right now comes down to a lot of that. There's only so much that a venue and a team or a league can do, and the structure can be in place, and it can be a very rigorous program. But once somebody breaks part of the chain, it's all going to fall down. And again, we saw that with some of the football games the past few weeks that have been delayed, or you know severe roster shortages. So it's a fascinating piece that I don't think people touch on a lot.
Well, and even just one thing there, just quickly, because I may be the only A architect who's in the NASCAR, like that just is that in and of itself. We got to underscore that. But I also follow a lot of bike racing, and that's exactly what the World Tour has done this fall, getting the Tour de France, the Giro, the Vuelta. I mean, a lot, and you think about that number of athletes in very close proximity for hours every day for weeks at a time, and there was only one small issue in, I want to say it was the Giro, but the whole almost 3 weeks of the Tour de France went off with no problems
Mhm.
because they essentially created those same kind of bubbles. They put the teams on the continents ahead of time, they quarantined them, and then when they did their thing, they basically were in their little bubbles. And then, yeah, they rode together every day, but it was no different than the NBA. You had, basically multiple bubbles riding down the road with each other, and that was the environment they created. And when they got done, they went to a hotel, they were locked in their room. Like, they did very different things as they traveled around, and you saw like people, commentators, like, God, I can't believe we got all the way through this. I can't believe we made it through the 3 weeks of this race or the 2.5 weeks of that race. But the underlying structure in some ways made it easy.
Mhm. Yeah, that's another good point. So, if you're all right, if you've got 5 more minutes to bump
Tons
this
of
out, awesome.
half hour.
If we can look, so now we've talked about that. We've got a body of evidence about what has worked. So, I'm a professional sports league reaching out to Aecom. Um, what from pre-event, event, and post-event, what are some things that I need to be looking at to filter down to my teams to make sure I can have a 2021 season with, even if it is the Utah Jazz percentage of fans, which I think that 1,500 is around 8% of fans in the stadium. What are some key points at those three levels that I should be looking at and sharing with my membership to get a season off the ground with fans in the stands?
Yeah, I think, let's kind of work it backwards from the event to the stands. I think that the first thing we kind of tell people straight away is you got to create a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those fans are people who are coming and going, and they may have their own little bubbles, but they're in a different bubble than the talent and the support groups that are making the event happen. So you got to create a little separation. So none of those, you can't high five players. Like, you just got to create some separation there. And it's, again, some people like that. Some people are kind of put off by it, but you can't get near the players, you can't get near the coaches, you can't get near the broadcasters. Like, you just gotta put a little bit of distance there. So that's sort of step one. And I think, again, all the leagues have got really good protocols in place for even those folks, the broadcasters coming and going, and how they're managing those populations. I think when we get into the crowds, the distancing, mask policies straight away, health checks. We've seen some examples of engagement around ticketing. Hey, every I say everybody with air quotes around it, is on a mobile ticketing platform now. So before I'll ship you your tickets, kind of like, getting on an airplane, you gotta have, the health questionnaire. Have you had symptoms? Have you da 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 da? So you can go through that. You can put some layers of control, and some people are doing that. When you get into the stadium, it's about minimizing that contact then. So we've, protocols for restrooms. We call it sort of queuing and congestion, except it's a different kind of queuing and congestion. We're trying to not encourage crowds.
Right.
So the timed ingress, again, depending on the size of the crowd you're talking about, it may be a non-issue, but not having everybody show up in the 30 minutes before an event starts. So you meter them a little bit so they have time to get a temperature check if you're doing that. They have time to go through the normal security screening. And you do that in a way that spreads that crowd out. So you're not, bunching people up, and again, creating an opportunity for for infection to occur.
Mhm.
Same thing at bathrooms. Again, the buildings are designed to function at such a high number that once you start to get down into like the 20% range, things like toilets work pretty easy because you got way more capacity than you have people. But
Right.
we have done throughput analysis at halftime, 15 minutes, 20 minutes of a halftime for, say, a football game, and you got X number of people. And in this quadrant of the stadium, you have this many services. So we're doing sort of behavior analysis with some math to say this number of people are going to stay in their chairs. This number of people are just going to go to the bathroom and come back. These people are going to go get food, go to the bathroom, maybe just stretch their legs. So we run all these scenarios against population, kind of establish some new queuing spaces like we all see at the grocery store or the Home Depot or whatever it is. And we test all that area to make sure we've got enough room for people to stay spread apart. And then lastly, the other thing it's kind of a bummer, but it's also very effective, is you just limit the menu for concession stands. You got to get it down to a very simple menu so I can go grab it. I've got 3 choices, bing, bing, bing. I grab it, swipe a card or a contactless payment, and I'm out of there, versus the normal, I'm waiting in line. What do I want to order from this menu of choices? And then how is that prepared? So we're looking at all those sort of points of contact and transfer and trying to streamline it down, working with, the concessionaire partners.
Right.
Um,
Lot of prepackaged. That's the idea, is all prepackaged,
yep.
pre-canned, sealed. Everything is.
Yeah. So the experience is going to look different, and you just gotta know that you might not be able to have, Frito pie for a while yet. Like that may be something we just don't know how to make in a safe environment. We have to wait for the vaccine before we can have Frito pie at sporting events again. But it's there are strategies like that, or we just have to think differently about that model. Again, to kind of stay on concession stands, we might have to group the checkout away from where people are waiting in line to get food, so that we can maintain distance for the waiting, and then we can maintain distance for the transaction. So it's thinking about the buildings differently. But maybe the last point I will make is that whole process takes way more space than can be accommodated safely at full capacity. Like there is a tipping point where we've shown clients, like, look, to do these things, if this is the thing we have until population gets vaccinated and there's some understanding or certainty about safety, you're going to reach a point where you can't do it with these 6-foot barriers and things anymore.
Right.
And that's a threshold point. So I think that's maybe the big unknown for everybody is, 50% occupancy in most buildings is going to be a stretch when you look at social distancing protocols and spacing and queuing and all that takes up. At some point, 50%, it gets hard. Again, you think about the age of most say stadiums and arenas versus even the newer ones are tough, but the older ones are really, it's a real challenge, and in some cases it's just not possible.
Yeah.
So I think that's the struggle we're having too, is everybody wants to have fans. They want to do it safely, but then when you look at the numbers in the pro forma against how many you can accommodate with all the I'll say best practices. Some people hate that term, but what we know to be best practices right now, there is a threshold there too. There just is.
Yeah, I look at, being in Boston, I look at Fenway Park, and like you said, it's an old venue, it's a classic venue, but there's just no way I think you can safely. I don't even know if you could get it down to 5% with the choke points in that venue. So it is an interesting discussion, and there is a few more topics that I want to get to. So I might have to ask you to come back on in a few weeks to touch on some different things. But I want to first off, thank you very much. I think this was great. It went again in a different direction, but an important direction that leaders in this industry need to think about. Again, starting from the top down to try to encourage the right behavior and performance so we can get these events off the ground. But I will close with 3 questions that I like all of my guests to answer. And the first one is, what book are you reading right now?
I am, I've been taking this time to do some professional development. So I'm studying for another architectural license certification. So that's the book I've been reading the last couple of months. It's two like 3-inch ring binders and then dozens of flashcards and practice tests. So unfortunately, yeah, if I'm reading right now, I'm reading for purpose, not for pleasure. And then, but I will say, and you know, we kind of talked about this. I'm when I'm not studying, which is 2 or 3 hours a day, I am listening to a lot of podcasts as a way to, while I'm moving, doing something else, try to get, haven't found audiobooks yet, but a lot of interviews of different, like kind of like you, different people, different industries, different perspectives on a variety of things, mental health, performance, whatever it might be, um, diversity, inclusion, just tons and tons of really interesting topics that are also very topical. And I've been filling my ears with those kinds of content and media.
Yeah, I think I've got a dozen podcasts that I'll listen through during the week regularly. So a lot of good content, like you said, to supplement your time out there. Next question: who are you following inside or outside of the sports industry right now?
Like following social media wise, or
Just
just
any
any
thought
voice?
leaders or somebody that you think is just doing something that you're keeping an eye on, in or out of the
Yeah.
industry?
Um, there. Well, again, it's a variety of folks. One person that's been kind of on my radar a lot lately is a pro cyclist named Justin Williams. He has a cycling team, Legion of Los Angeles, but he's been kind of at the forefront of diversity inclusion in cycling. So even if you're a US or a global cycling fan, you know that that's just not a sport that's historically known for diversity or even gender equity. And what Justin's been doing with the Legion team has been, again, at cycling's kind of a hobby of mine. So I've been really interested in seeing what he's doing there, how he's looking at the economics of professional sports differently, and then how he's wrapping that around some sort of really, really thought provoking and actionable things he's doing. He's not just talking about it around equity and inclusion. So he's been somebody I've been listening to because he's been showing up on all these different podcasts lately. So that's probably one. Um, Sports wise, I will admit, I will like I say, I what I do architecture wise, I don't really follow a lot of architects. I
Mhm.
try to look for other perspectives. So lately it's been listening to a lot of different points of view, uh, vis-a-vis vis-a-vis podcasts, and then really more about the guests, less about the hosts
Mhm.
and more about the guests. So I think that's not a very specific answer to your question, but I've been trying to surround myself with as many different points of view and perspectives as I can, uh, the last 6 or 9 months. Just really like almost go on weeks at a time, listen to one person, find a different person, and just really try to get as diverse of points of view on different topics or sports or performance or whatever, leadership, but just to try and fill my brain with a lot of different ideas about how things can be done, so then I can synthesize it down into something that I want to do for myself.
Right. Nope. No, you answered it. You gave me a name and you gave us more than that. And then last one, and we'll get you out of here. What's something you're going to be keeping your eye on over the next 3 months?
Um, I think that the thing that's been interesting to me is going to be this return to occupancy of spectators, whether it's live entertainment. I'm actually more interested in live entertainment and music
You and me both.
than sports. And the reason I say that is because I think sports have pivoted, not necessarily in a sustainable way financially, but broadcast. We can watch golf on TV, we can watch NASCAR, we can watch cycling, football, baseball, hockey, whatever you want to watch. You can watch it on TV, even if you can't go. What we haven't figured out yet, and you see, some really interesting live streaming with artists. Spent a lot of time watching Ben Folds, every Saturday night in Australia doing live stream shows. There's been some really interesting, the Post Malone Nirvana cover. If you haven't seen it, go find it. It's phenomenal.
I think I have. It's been me and Fish. once a week.
Yeah, I did watch the fish documentary. That was one of my early days. I hadn't seen that one before, but I think that's the industry that I'm most interested in. There was a Ticketmaster proposal about how they want to try and reinstitute live entertainment, which is intriguing. If you haven't seen it, you
With
might like
having to have proof that you've been vaccinated and tested negative, correct?
the Gattaca concept is what John Niemuth calls it. But I think that's interesting because that's different than sport. So, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just it's a different approach for how do you get people into clubs. I mean, I had been seen going to a lot of kind of 500 to 3,000 person music events the last few years, and so that's where I'm like, well, how do I get back to that? Where are people going to feel comfortable? And then think about the behavior comments we made, the conversation we had earlier in the show. Like, that's how do you do that? And those events typically want to have a lot of booze, and we've already sort of seen that correlation between booze and failing discipline with your mask and all that other
Right.
kind of stuff. So yeah, I think live entertainment is the one that is really interesting to me, because when you get back to what do I do for a living, the economy that underpins a lot of these stadiums and arenas is live entertainment, whether it's Disney princesses or rock shows or the Grammys, whatever it is, like these big live entertainment, live productions is really the economic engine that fuels a lot of these venues. It's not the sport.
Mm.
And I think that's going to be interesting. Similarly, you see that with airports. I've been traveling a little for work, and you see just the volume of air travel is so low, and you wonder how long can that really sustain. So that's where my head is watching is, hey, we're starting to see some signs of life, but how are we going to really make that next big leap, um, to either protect things that we care about or figure out how they're going to evolve into whatever's next. So that's kind of where my eye is at, is kind of, we know what we've been living in the last 9-10 months, almost a year now, I guess, but what's the next version of this? Because I'm not sure doing this for another year is going to be the thing. So how do we evolve into that next thing, but do it safely? So that's kind of where my eye is at, is yeah, everybody wants to talk about the winter, and oh my gosh, I was like, everybody's got a point of view on what's going to happen this winter. But when we get back to March and we're all rolling over our calendars and saying, okay, here's the second year for
Yeah.
something that nobody thought was going to last more than 30 days. And we're going into year two.
Hmm.
How are we going to make year two better?
Right. Right. Well, John, thank you so much. I think you gave me and my audience a lot of things to mull over. Good stuff. Like I said, there are some topics that I didn't get to that I'm definitely going to want to bring you back on to talk about later. But thank you so much, and everyone will see you for the next episode.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bill. Appreciate it.